All right, guys, we're going to see if we can get this going. We got a couple minutes before 8. Want to make sure everything's working on our end. Kind of see where everything's sitting. Going to be a fun night. I'm going to talk fishing, which is always fun. All right, seems to be working on our end. Just going to give this a share. You guys could do me a favor and share this. Let me mute that. You guys can share this, would be great. We're going to get this thing rolling. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, sounds good, looks good. I like it. All right. So I'll share a link there on my own timeline. All right, so let's talk fishing. Since all this craziness is going on. Got a couple things we're going to try tonight. I've taken all of my stuff, my main stuff that I would tackle the Lake Erie smallmouth in the spring. And really the season is open all year round, which is kind of cool. But there's certain regulations you're probably going to want to know about. So I've written a bunch of notes and everything. And, you know, we can go through everything. But I see guys are joining up now. If you guys who joined can give it a share, help me out here. Let's get the word out. Let's talk fishing. I've had enough of the news, to be honest with you all. I've absolutely had enough of broadcast news. I don't want to hear any more about it. If you want to check things out, I've been checking online, looking at updates, talking to a bunch of people. Everybody seems to be doing well. I feel like this is kind of a reset for us and a little bit of a good thing. I'm getting work done. And I've got some great news, actually. Our lakes are starting to break up. There's a big, giant hole on Simcoe now, right in front of Georgina Island, the Kawartha Lakes. You know what? While we're talking about that, let's take a look at it. Let me head over to my shots here. I actually have some shots of that. And guys, if you have comments, feel free to post them. I'll get them directly on StreamYard here. So I'm going to hide this. I got something cool for you guys to see. Let's see which one we got here. That's the one. So I'm going to bring this over to here. Come on. Get your butt moving. All right, so up you go. So this is kind of cool for everybody who actually is interested in the ice out. Check this out. Let's do this. All right, so got a satellite image, and I go to Modus Great Lakes Imagery for this. Gives us a good bird's eye view. And if I actually zoom in here a little bit further, and I'll take us over to our area. So, you know, Erie's obviously the bottom thing where you see there's a bit of mud on it right now, but for all of us up here in Ontario, the end is almost here. You see this right here? This is Simcoe. So you can see the color of the ice. This is actually the last part that froze, and you can see how it's almost see-through. That's getting ready to go, but right here in between Georgina and the main line, there's a big pocket of open water. So really all we need now is a bunch of basically wind, and we've got the warm temps coming, but there is open water in the lake. There's a big crack. Once that thing starts shifting back and forth, we're going to be there. But check out the Kawarthas. I mean, everywhere the rivers come in, obviously there's current. The ice is going to go faster, but Buckhorn's got a giant hole in it right now, right there. So there's a lot of open water on Buckhorn moving around, going through. Rice Lake is probably about 50% ice-free right now. The entire Bay of Quinte and St. Lawrence, obviously, is ice-free. And then Scugog is starting to break up pretty good, too. So that's kind of cool. That just gives me a little bit of hope that I'm going to be able to get out and do some fishing soon. So I am absolutely ecstatic about that. All right, so where do we want to start? Anybody have any suggestions where you guys want to start? I'm seeing all you guys coming in here. I'm seeing all your posts here. Appreciate it. If you guys could share this, we'll get this out as far as we can. Let's start with Lake Erie. So let's do something a little bit different here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down what I've got on the other side. And I'm going to open up. I've got a browser open, which is kind of unique here. We could do this. And I'm going to spread this out. And we're going to start with Navionics, because I think if you're going to check out Erie, Erie's fishery being open all year round is actually awesome. And typically we don't head down there until May. There are a couple rules you have to understand if you're going to head out there. One, if your boat is 21 feet or under, from November 1st all the way through May 1st, every person in the boat has to be wearing a life jacket, even when the boat is not running. And I think it's a great thing. When the water's cold, it's never a bad thing. So that's why you see most guys just use float suits. It gets it over with. The survival suits are considered a PFD. If you're heading to New York for the first time, there's other regulations you want to know about. Like you have to have a section of chain on your anchor. You have to have an anchor. You have to have a throwable cushion. You have to have a 12-inch by 12-inch, I believe, orange signaling flag for flagging people down. And then the standard stuff applies. So basically what you want to do is go to the New York fisheries or go to the New York State boating regulations. Make sure you're up to date first and foremost. We're going to have chances. I mean, if the wind calms down, you can get out there technically before May hits because we are the 22nd of February right now. The water's going to be cold. It's going to probably be in the high 30s, but the fish will still eat. They're still there. So anyways, let's take a look at Erie. Let's take a look right here. All right. So here's Lake Erie. Let's switch this up. So basically what I'm going to use Navionics web app, which is actually really good for doing this kind of stuff. And for the most part, where we concentrate when we're fishing on Lake Erie is this, the Eastern Basin. Okay, so in between Dunkirk and Buffalo, do not fish the Canadian side, folks. It is closed until the 4th Saturday of April. All right, no matter how bad you want to fish it. So when you're using this app, here's a couple of tips for you. If you go to this bottom corner right here, you see where I'm going over there, you can select this. There's a selection between Navionics, which gives you the standard 6-foot or 8-foot contours. If you go to sonar charts and you zoom in, you get 1-foot contours. They're not 100% accurate, but they're good enough to give you a starting point. One of the guys that really, one of the things that we look for when we're doing this is transitions. Okay, so this time of year, especially when the water starts getting, into the low 40s to mid 40s, the transitions are really key on Erie. And by transitions, I mean changes from hard bottom to soft bottom. So whether it's sand to shell or sand to rock, these transitions, they really act as highways for these fish. So as I'm going along here, guys, I'm going to see questions on the side here. They're all popping up. I see that Dakota asked about the website for the satellite image. Charles Nams shared it, guys. So if you look down to Charles Nams' post, it's the Coast Watch Modus region maps. You could check out that there. Actually, and then so Dusan just asked, is crossing the border on water the same as driving across? Technically, yes. Technically, no. We've always heard, and they were cracking down for a little while about guys driving from Canada by boat. So launch in Canada, drive across fish. The one thing you cannot do is touch land if you do that. If you go anywhere near the land, they're probably going to jump all over you. There is, on that Erie shoreline, basically they have radar and heat, and it's actually they can even check at night because they got like thermal radar as well, where they'll track you guys because they don't want people touching shore if you're going to do that. So yes, you can do it. I don't see it a problem. Even if this travel restriction is on, I don't think anybody's going to really be out to break us in terms of fishing. I think the bigger problem is going to be if the travel restriction happens to Canadians as well. So that's the one thing we got to watch. Question here from Tony B is the Canadian side better or the USA? The Canadian side equals jail time this time of year. Okay, so just for everybody, every one of my US buddies, understand that the Canadian side of Lake Erie, and the border is defined by a big red line. You can see it. Where's my cursor? Right here. This red line separates US and Canada. The smallmouth fishery is closed until the 4th Saturday. Bass fishery in general is closed until the 4th Saturday of June on the Canadian side. So that's why you see this influx of Canadians heading down to the Buffalo side or the American side of Lake Erie. So that's one thing we want to make sure we keep an eye on. So anyways, let's not get too sidetracked here. Let's talk about finding the fish. Okay, so I talk about transitions. What is a transition? So a transition is a change between bottoms, and the big one is sand to rock, and that's the one we really look for in the spring. And actually all year round we look for them, but they play really good in the spring. So what a transition looks like, you can see here, and this is not from Erie, this has got a staircase going through the middle of it, but a transition on side imaging, especially on the mega imaging, it's really easy to tell, is this separation of color right here where it goes from light to dark. That's a transition. Okay, it's a very simple hard bottom to soft bottom transition. One thing I always look for, and this is whenever I'm side imaging, I'm looking for these transitions, I will drop waypoints, especially when transitions have ins and outs on them. I'll drop my waypoints on them because this time of year, it's critical to be on that transition. Like, you want to be right on it. You want your baits to be right on it because the fish are using that as a highway. Okay. Yes, Marky, all your hotspots are on the US side anyways, and they're usually come from one of our boats when you're fishing with us. Looking forward to actually seeing you. We have a group going down the beginning of May, so I'm actually, this is a great talk because it gets me thinking about it, and it'll help out a bunch of people if you're trying to head down. But transitions are what you're looking for. The reason they look like this on side imaging is because the harder the bottom, the brighter the return is. So the brighter the image will be. The softer the bottom, the darker the image. You can see here. So this could be a moderate sand or, you know, not a super hard sand, hard packed sand. As the sand gets harder packed, or you start involving shell, or you start involving rock, you start seeing this bright return. So what you want to do is find these areas where you have this defined transition from dark to light. Those are the key areas you're going to want to key in on. And for depths, you're really going to want to look at, as soon as we start this and the water's in the 40s, or the water's in the, you know, all the way through the 40s. We're looking for that depth. They could be in 20 feet of water. They could be in 30 feet of water. They could be in 40 feet of water. Obviously, the closer to ice out we are, the deeper they are. And then they start to move themselves in, okay? The big trigger for a lot of these fish is actually the 50-degree mark, because that's when they start thinking spawn. That's when they start heading into the shallows to follow bait. That's when, you know, they start making that transition. But as soon as the ice is out, first week of May or the end of March, or all through April, sorry, we got, oh my God, we got another month before May comes. Now I'm really itching. So basically, that time frame where the water's in the 30s, climbing into the 40s, is where you're going to want to concentrate, I would say, from 20 to 40 feet of water, finding those transitions. And they happen all over the place. If I go to the map, actually, let's do a question right here before I go to the map. Let's show Dave Fogelman. Hey, Dave. Dave, one of our Detroit boys. What do you think the gobies and smallmouth tend to be bigger on the eastern basin than the western? Why do you think? And that's from Hammer, Dave Fogelman. Why do I think the gobies and smallmouth tend to be bigger on the eastern basin? I don't know if it's a area thing, or if it's because of the population change. Like, your western basin has a lot more walleye, a lot more bait, a lot more steelhead than we have on the eastern basin. But trust me, there's a lot of walleye on our end as well. I just think that maybe because of the water clarity and the deeper water, which we have a lot more of on the eastern basin, it's a better growing thing for what we have for fish. So I just find always, I mean, if you want shots at 6s and 7s, the eastern basin has always notoriously been better. Unfortunately for you, Hammer, you got to come drive 3 or 4 hours to come and get it. But hopefully we're going to see you this spring. And Charles has a response for you, which I'm sure is nothing but sarcastic. So, looking at a map, let's go back to the map here. All right, so when it comes to finding these transitions, what I try to look for a lot of times is stacked. When you stack up your actual lines, your depth lines, okay? So you can see in certain areas here, the tighter the lines get indicates either a ledge or a drop-off of some sort, but it indicates a change. And that's the most important thing. So let's zoom into, let's say, Seneca. Seneca's a fairly popular spot. It's got a lot of fish on it. Sorry if I'm giving away people's spots here, but when it comes to Seneca, you see here was a prime example of a stacked set of contours. Okay, these stacked set of contours are going to tell you there's a drop. In this case, it's dropping from the 40-foot mark to 43, 44 feet in the center. It's a 4-foot ledge. Okay, those areas are going to have a natural transition line on them. The other things that you're going to look for in that when you go along it, I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to go in side image along that. And I'm going to look, when you set your side imaging up, don't be greedy. A lot of people set up side imaging, and what they try to do is they try to span it out 120, 150 feet. And yeah, it will work. But the highest level of detail you're going to get in any side imaging units is on the lower ranges. And so when I'm fishing over 20 feet of water. I try to keep it between 70 and 90 feet of water. That would be a great area to be in. And when I do it on the opposite side, when I go shallower, I shorten it up. Because the tighter it is, okay, the tighter that your side imaging beam is, the more detail you're going to see in that wider section of screen. The other thing you can do, which really helps, and a lot of people don't know you can do this with the new software, is on Hummingbird, you can horizontally split your side imaging rather than vertically split it. So if you vertically split it, you got left and right side, and you've got half a screen, half a 9-inch screen, 10-inch screen, 12-inch screen, whatever you have. If you horizontally split it, all that detail goes into the entire 9, 10, 12 inches on top and bottom, rather than being split and having 4.5 inches. So that's another way to really help get more detail out of your units. You know, one of the most popular things you'll see on this area, and this is really, we're fishing from Sturgeon Point, is a great launch point, all the way to Buffalo Small Boat Harbor. There's an excellent marina in there. You're going to see packs of people out in front of this Buffalo area, and they'll be referred to as the windmills, and they've got slag piles and a ton of structure, everything from shallow fish all the way out to deep fish. Seneca Shoal is always a great place to check. This entire shoreline really on the south side of the lake, and this is actually Myers Reef. So if I zoom into this, you'll see it's a big, long reef section. You'll find guys trolling for walleyes out here early in the year. But this entire section where you see these stacked up transitions is a great place to check as well. And, you know, you're going to see a lot of boats out there. I'm going to ask you guys a favor. Have a little bit of ethics when it comes to fishing this thing. For some reason, and I don't know why it is, but people forget their ethics when it comes to Lake Erie. And this is no joke. I mean, a lot of people absolutely forget ethics. And by ethics, I mean, okay, it's fine. You see a bunch of people in an area. For me, that's an indicator as to, you know, yeah, maybe it's a specific depth they're in. Maybe there's a type of structure. Don't play the bass boat pattern. Just because 2 boats makes 4 and 4 makes 8 and 8 makes 16, don't be that next guy. But worse yet is the guys that are there who shortcut you on your drifts. So for a lot of this stuff, some people will spot lock on stuff, especially when it's not windy, and they'll be fishing specific rock piles. But for the most part, this time of year, the best game is to get on a contour, and if you have that transition, to work it. And it could be 200 yards long. It could be 4 kilometers long. The worst thing ever, if you see a boat heading in a specific direction, is to come up and cut in front of them and get the first shot at their fish. That is probably the dirtiest move, and probably nothing frustrates me more when it comes to fishing Lake Erie, especially in the springtime, than guys who do that. You have people from all over the U.S. I see license plates from every state, and I see guys from all over Ontario. Don't be that guy. Just don't be the guy. Have some ethics. If you see a guy working a spot, yeah, just give him his space. So, you know, here it's just one of those things. It's just the one thing that frustrates me. But anyways, I'm going to digress on that, because then I'm going to get into other things. So again, Sturgeon Point over. If you are heading a little further down the lake and you're heading towards Dunkirk, which is another popular area, the cool thing about Dunkirk is Dunkirk has a unique feature here, and you can see it right here. It's got an inner break wall. Okay, it's got actually 2. But inside here, and I've seen a bunch of Canadians down here, and we spend a bunch of time here every year as well, you get a lot of shot at a lot of fish in shallow. We're talking under 4 feet of water. And a lot of them will be bedding at certain times of the year, but I'd say beginning of May, maybe not. It depends. You need a bit of a warm spell. It does warm up rather quickly in there. But you can catch them on reaction baits. If you want to throw a spinnerbait all day, or you want to throw a jerk bait, or you want to throw a square bill, it's a great place to go bend a rod, for sure. You're not going to catch giants. We have caught big ones in there, but your average fish is going to be between 2 and 3 pounds in this area. But there's good numbers, okay? But there's also a lot of traffic in there. So that's another area you can check out. So that's how I kind of search areas. I use a lot of what we do is with side imaging. Once we find our transitions, once I mark my spots, then it becomes a game of, you know, where are they, what are they doing, and how are you going to catch them. So let's talk a little bit about, they want the map. Sorry, I was talking to you guys about the map and I wasn't showing the map. So here's the map. Let's go back to this. So here's that Dunkirk area. Okay, so you can see here, This is kind of cool. So you got this entire area here, which there's a boat launch here, which is great. The boat launch is right here in this corner, right in there. I believe it is $7 or $8 US to launch there. Perfect facility. Got a great restaurant on the water there if you want to spend the day there. But most of the guys are going to fish inside these areas here. You can go around. This is a riprap wall. You can fish out in front. A lot of guys for the shallow fish are going to fish in this area here. And if the water's clear in there, you'll see them swirling around. So that's the area I've been talking about catching numbers of fish. I mean, you can head out into the big lake. You can go this way. I believe it's about 35 miles to, or 30 miles to Buffalo. You can head the other way and you can head to Barcelona if you want, okay? Lots of options, tons of options. But for the most part, for us, we're either in Dunkirk or we're fishing the Buffalo end of things, so between Sturgeon Point and Buffalo. All right, so let's talk about baits a bit. Let's head back here. Is there a preferred speed when side imaging? Moose, awesome question. So here's Moose's question here. It's a crazy picture, Moose. A little freaky, actually, with the green eyes. Is there a preferred speed? Yeah, absolutely. Don't be in too much of a rush, but don't go too slow. I find between 4 and 5 miles an hour tends to be best if your side imaging transducer is set up properly. Okay, and it needs to be on the upper pad. It needs to have good, clean water to read well. You can read at 6 and 7, depending on your boat. But what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up with a lot of turbulence and you're going to see a little bit of degradation in quality and definition. So between 3.5 to 5 miles an hour typically is about perfect when you're side imaging. So you want to be concentrating on that kind of speed to get the best image. Once you get the image, I'll show you guys another image here that I have. This one is of isolated boulders. Aside from the traditional transitions that I'm looking for, there is another thing that I tend to look for quite a bit, and that is isolated boulders on a flat. And that is more so not in the early cold section, but if you have this kind of stuff when they're feeding or moving shallower and you have flats that have this kind of stuff, this is what you're looking for. So, you know, an easy way to do it, I just took these off the net. There's some great pictures out there. An easy way to do it is move your cursor over to what you're looking at and hit the plus button on a hummingbird and you can zoom in. And technically when you're reading your side imaging, the easiest way to see it is the higher the shadow, this is the shadow of this rock, the taller the shadow, the bigger the rock is, the taller it is off the bottom. So, you know, these are all good sized rocks that are going to provide perfect shelter. And this is in 15 feet of water. For me, that would scream bedding area. That would be perfect areas for smallmouth to build beds on in Erie. And again, when you're talking spawn for these Erie fish, I mean, they're going to spawn anywhere from, I've seen them in 24 feet of water. I've seen them as shallow as 4 feet of water. But we'll talk about the spawn in a bit. Let's talk more about baits when we find them early. All right, so I got a ton of baits here. I got a ton of stuff. Probably my number one thing is when it's early, you don't want to go too crazy with how you're fishing them. I keep it simple, either dragging a tube or I'm going to be dragging a football head swim bait. So I'm going to show you guys my favorite rig for doing that, and I'll show you how I do it. It's actually a Freedom football head with a straight shank hook. But I'm going to show you exactly how I do that because I rig it a little differently. I've done little videos on this thing, but this little piece right here, I'm going to hold this up for you guys. You see that? It's a screw lock. Okay. This is a VMC straight shank spinnerbait hook. I actually have a link for that so you guys can see it if you want to write it down what I'm using. This is the hook right here. Okay? This is the actual model number that I use. It's available from 1/0 all the way up to 5/0. Most of my fishing is done with 3, 4, and 5/0, but 3 and 4 are probably the most for smallmouth. Real reason why I love this hook so much, it's stout enough, it's straight, it's black nickel, but it's got the right size gap. It's not an overly wide gap like some hooks that you see. You get those gaps that are super wide. It's not like that. So how do I rig it? You take your spring lock, and what you're going to want to do is actually feed it onto the hook shank. So you see that there? See how it's on the hook shank? I would really wish it was clearer, but it's not too bad. And then what I do is I take a pair of pliers and I bend open the eye of the spring lock, and you're going to basically put it so it goes inside the eye of the hook, and then you're going to pinch them together. All right, so what you end up with is something that looks like that. So that is actually on the actual hook. Now, if you take the thing, the Freedom heads, the Freedom football heads, the nice thing about them is you can put any hook you want. If you're a gammy guy, you're a mustad guy, you're a VMC guy like I am for this specific hook, you pick. Just make sure the eye is flat and not turned the other way like some hooks are, because then it'll sit sideways on the Freedom head. So with a Freedom head, you're going to pop this thing onto their little twist. And basically what I do is once you roll it up, just like that, you get this. Okay? The reason I like this so much is there's two things. One, it adds action to whatever bait I'm putting on it. So if I'm throwing a Sasu Techie Craw or I'm throwing a Jackal Rhythm Wave, it adds an extra bit of swing to it. But compared to traditional swing heads, this happens quite a bit. You see them with traditional swing heads. They have an external eye and then a swivel to put the hook on. The hook has the opportunity to come all the way up and around and catch your line, which is the last thing you want when you're bumping rock and everything else. This stops it. The way it's designed with the head, it can't go past 90 degrees at any one point in time. So it helps with the hook sets. It helps with fighting the fish because they can't use that weight on you. It's loose, but it stops it from coming up and catching the line. So how do I rig a bait? My number one bait on Erie for the number of years has been this. This is a 3.8-inch rhythm wave from Jackal. If you pick colors to go to Erie, this color right here, I know there's a lot of light bouncing off the screen, but this is Prism Shad. It's probably my number one. This is Blue Pearl Shad. This is a new color that came out last year. Goby, Green Pumpkin, Prism Shad, Blue Pearl Shad. I mean, all phenomenal. All phenomenal colors. Golden Shad. I haven't met one. The only ones I really don't use for the smallmouth are the straight black one and the white one. But every other color has been working. One thing, as the water's colder, they're more keyed in on the minnow bite than they are on the goby bite. That's going to happen as the water warms up. But for now, the big thing is early, I'm going to be throwing minnow-based colors. So Blue Pearl Shad, Bluegill are going to get the brunt of it, and Prism Shad will get the brunt of my work. You notice right away it's got a very narrow head. I want this to fit inside the width of the back of the head so it matches. So the first thing I'm going to do is bite off just the tip of it. So that it looks like that. I want it to be a little wider. When you rig on a screw lock, I've given these to guys and I've seen them try to shove the bait up the screw lock. It doesn't really work that way. What you want to do is take the bait, thread it up the hook to the point where you know you need it. I just kind of know from doing it all the time, but you're going to want to measure. And when you get to this point right here, where your bait's up against, what you want to do is bring the tail under and twist. I'll show you guys. You bring the tail under the hook round and twist. Bring it under and twist. And what you're doing is basically you're screwing that plastic up the shank of that screw lock towards the head of the bait. And what that does is make the bait almost impossible for the fish to tear down. Okay, so one more to get it right where I want it. Once it gets to the head of the bait, which is right there, you can see how close I put it, okay? That bait is a perfect football head, straight on the hook, open hook. So I'm not using a Texas rigging hook. I've got an open hook. So when you get those shy biters, which happens quite a bit in the spring when the water is especially cold, I can get that fish pinched right away. I don't want to use a Texas rigging hook. I want that open hook, especially on those shy biters in those colder waters. And when I fish something like this, this is a 3/4 ounce football head. They also have a 1/2 ounce version right here. See that better? 1/2 ounce version. I fish it on casting equipment. Basically, I fish mine on an 892C. So I fish it on G Loomis IMX Pro or GLX or whatever model I'm using. But the thing is, it's an 892C. So it is a medium power, 7'5" rod with extra fast action, and I'm fishing it with braid to fluoro on baitcaster. So I go with a high speed gear ratio. So I'm using either, you know, our HGs or our XG reels. So it could be, my favorite honestly is the Bantam, just because it is that solid, that core solid body is so good for pounding in and dragging fish in. And I'm fishing them for line on my baitcasters. I'll try to get an angle that you guys can actually see this. Man, there's a lot of brightness here. Let's see if I get past it. Oh, right there. Okay, 30-pound Super 8 Slick V2. That's my main line for the spring on my bait casters. It is probably one of the best casting. It's kind of quiet. It's got that slick coating on it. It's got a good abrasion resistance, but I'm using it with a leader. I'm going to use 2 leaders usually when I'm doing this. I'm not playing games. I've got a spinnerbait hook that is 2X. I've got a rod that is 7'5". I've got a high-speed gear ratio. I've got 30-pound braided line. And then I'm either running 20-pound, other way, or 16-pound fluorocarbon leader with an FG knot. And I'm not using a little bit of it. I'm tying an FG and I'm rolling up, 10, 12, 15 feet of line as my leader. The reason you want the fluorocarbon isn't so much for the sight. I don't think smallmouth are that smart, because a lot of times in the spring the water is a little bit dirty. It's even more so because of abrasion resistance. The areas with the zebra mussels will tear your stuff up hard, and I mean super hard. So the one thing I do is make sure I use fluorocarbon, good quality fluorocarbon with an FG knot, 30-pound on my main line, and I swing for the fences. This is not, you're not playing around with them here. When you get bit, you can swing hard and you can drag them in. And the average fish is probably going to be, in that 4+ pound range. So if you hit it right, it could be really good fishing. Hi, Tommy Lee. What's going on? Thanks, everybody, again, for tuning in. This is great. We've had like over 120 people watching the entire time. If you guys can share it, it would help us out even further. So that is my first setup. My second setup is with a tube, and I'm going to show you guys what I do with that as well. So I actually brought in all my stuff for you guys. It actually felt good to go in the boat and pull through some tackle. So tube heads. The weight you're going to want when you're starting out, basically the rods you're going to want for tubes, I use the same thing. I use an 892, so a 7'5" medium, extra fast. All of my rods for Erie are either 852s or 892s, which means 7'1" or 7'5", medium power, extra fast. I find anytime I'm dragging or feeling bottom, those 2 rods on Erie work really well for me. When it comes to tube heads, I have everything usually with me this time of year from a 1/4 up to a 1/2. Because on the days when the wind's pushing you a little harder and you're moving faster and you're fishing deeper, you're going to want baits up to like 3/4 are a good start. But for the most part, if I can get away with a lighter weight, I'll try to get away with it. So 3/8 tends to be my #1 bait, that weight I throw with the tube. So let me grab a tube here for you guys. All right, we got that and that. There's my tubes. And we'll talk drop shot as well and cranking and stuff like that. I kind of put everything together today. My tube box. All right, so just found some hooks I was looking for. All right, when it comes to colors for tubes, I try to keep it very goby or minnow oriented. So, and I also in the spring really like the shorter ones. This is a 2.75 inch double dip. This is Right Bite Baits. You want them double or triple dipped. You want them thicker because they're going to take a lot of abuse dragging. When you're rigging your tube heads, because I use the 275s, I pour my own hooks for them. This has got a very stout 2X 2/0 hook in it, which this thing fits perfectly. And I know a lot of people tell you not to lick lead, but I mean, considering what's going on in the world, I think lead is the least of my concerns at this point. But to get the tube head in, it's always good to wet it a bit. Tony B's asking, do I like coffee tubes? You know what? I don't know if I fall for the entire coffee thing. I like the colors of them. I think they got phenomenal colors. But I like a plain old salted tube. I'm not a big scent guy. I never have been. So once you slide that head up to the top, you just kind of rub where the eye of the hook is, and that'll pop through. So that's my 2.7 inch, 2.75 inch tube. And for colors, like I said, that's a green pumpkin with gold, holographic gold and purple. Always a good one. Sometimes when you're looking more minnowish, you get the smoke colors with fleck in it. This one's got a little bit of blue in it, baby blue and green. Smoke silvers, but anything really smoke purple, anything along the green pumpkin family, green pumpkin purple, green pumpkin gold, straight green pumpkin, straight watermelon, watermelon candy. I mean, all of them down there will work. But if they're minnow based, if you find you're catching them and you catch a couple, and you bring them up and they spit up minnows, switch to your smoke color tubes. If you're catching them and they're not spitting minnows up, that probably means they're just choking on gobies and stuff. Then the green pumpkins will work. Best case scenarios, have 2 of you in the boat. One guy's going minnow shades, one guy's going goby colors, and you see which one starts catching more. And then you adapt from there. That's the easiest way to do it. So again, for heads, you want 1/4, 3/8, up to a half for the tubes will usually get you down. For the setup, undeniably for me, 852, so 7'5" medium, extra fast. For a reel, 2,500 or 3,000. I really like the 3,000 size when it comes to Lake Erie. And the reason is, you know what? Let me grab one. I got some behind me. The reason I like it is because of the handle. So if I grab a 3,000, okay, this is one of my setups here. This is my blade setup, actually. This one here is 2,500, but 2,500s and 3,000s, the main difference between them is the size of the spool capacity. The bodies are exactly the same. I mean, they're absolutely identical. Still have weed on that from the fall of walleye fishing. They're absolutely identical. So the reason I like going to the 3,000 is it'll hold an extra 40 yards of 8-pound test without sacrificing or going bigger in the size of the reel. It really is a good situation. And the handle ends up going from this style, which is the smaller 2,500 size, to a little bit wider of a T-handle on the 3,000. So when you're dragging and you're pulling fish in from long distances, it really helps. You'll see a lot of guys when we're out on Erie is we're getting our baits way back there. Again, I'm trying to fish a 1/4 if I can, or 3/8 if I can, and get it way back there. That's why I go to the 3,000. For line, undeniably, for me, 10 or 8-pound Super 8 Slick V2 from Power Pro is the line I go. Let me do a quick question here while we're doing this. Oh, no, wrong one. Sorry, Crowley. Came in. Fishy. So he's asking if I mark bait on the graph in key areas in the spring. Yeah, sometimes you do, but that doesn't mean if there's no bait, there's no fish. There are far more times where I'm catching fish on transitions that I'm not marking bait because they're not there because of the bait. They're there because of the transition. Okay, so ideally what you're looking for is you're looking for areas that have the transition first and foremost. I mean, if I'm running along in 40 feet of water and I start marking schools of bait, odds are good there's going to be some fish around it. And usually it's in the middle of nowhere or off of ledges or, you know, on flats. So for me, I'm not worried about the bait. I'm worried about the structure first and foremost. So the setup again, this is a Conquest 902. This is a great rod for doing a bunch of things on Erie, but an 852 IMX Pro S, 852S or 892S. So 7'1", 7'5", medium power, extra fast is a perfect setup. 2,500 or 3,000 size spinning reel, and again 8 or 10-pound Power Pro Super 8 Slick V2. Same deal though, fluorocarbon leader. And again, guys, you know, I see a lot of guys come out there and they're fishing 6-pound test when they're doing stuff like this. I don't play that game either. I mean, the lightest, and I mean the absolute lightest I will throw is 12 when I'm tying an FG knot. Most of the times, 16 is my #1 line, even on my spinning setups. And again, it's not like I catch less fish than anybody else. It's not about that. The fish are not that line shy out there. They're really there to feed. And, you know, it's the first crack. They're not pressured. It's an easy setup, and I can drag them in. I don't have to retie all the time when you're banging on the zebra mussels. That's the reason why I like going to that heavier line, is because there's nothing worse than going through a ton of lead, ton of jig heads, you know, or losing fish on hook sets because you've been dragging for a while way out there. You feel you got caught in the rocks a couple times, pop it off, get a bite finally, set the hook and break them. When I'm using 12, 14, or 16-pound test, I don't have those problems all that often. So that's the reason why I use the heavier line. So that's my tube setup. You know, my swim bait football or football cross setup. That's pretty easy. We talk about drop shot if you guys want, because some days, guys, they're really, McCall's asking, hey, Shawnee, let me add this one up. Sean's asking, how long of a leader do I use? So basically, Sean, I've been talking about the fact that with the FG knot, my leaders are at minimum 10 feet long, up to 20 feet long, depending on what I'm using. It's a lot harder on a spinning reel to put 20 feet of 16-pound test where it wraps onto the reel because it's so thick. But on baitcaster especially, I run an extra long leader. That good picture of you there, Sean. That's awesome. Got another question here before I move on to drop shot. What's your thoughts on drop shot versus football head setups? Dakota, perfect timing, bud. Which would you rather and why? So there is no rather and why in this situation. There is time and place. Some days when the fish are keyed in on the bottom, you're not going to be able to beat anybody with a drop shot. The football head's going to take a beating. It's going to get bit more often. Same with dragging the tube. When you start seeing, and my key for drop shot fishing is when I start seeing them better off the bottom. If I'm catching fish and I'm not marking a lot, that's telling me they're belly down. Okay, they're sitting like this. So you're not getting that separation on the graph, so you're not marking them on the 2D sonar. That's telling me they're looking down, they're down, they're working the bottom. When they start separating a bit and you see them a foot off bottom, that's a great time to key in on drop shot. But no different than when I said you should have two guys fishing two different types of tubes, one minnow-based, one goby-based. You should also have one guy throwing a drop shot and one guy throwing something on the bottom to help you narrow down your pattern for the day. It does change quite a bit throughout the day. It does change with water conditions. It changes with wind. It changes with barometric pressure. It's fishing. There's no finite answer as to why any of this stuff is going to go, but odds are good. When it comes to a drop shot, when they're eating it, they're eating it. And when they're not eating it, they're not eating it. So if I'm not getting bit throwing a football head or a tube, my next move is a drop shot. So I've got a couple of big questions coming up here. So let's get to the drop shot before we do. My number one hook for drop shot. I actually got a shot of it for you guys so you can see it. So let's go to the screen. All right, that's my number one hook for drop shotting. It's right here. G-Finesse Aaron Martin's TGW drop shot hook. Okay, that hook is so good that 9 times out of 10, I've got to take it out of the fish's face with pliers, and 9 times out of 10, I end up bending it. Good and bad. But in a tournament situation, you're not losing fish. I mean, that hook is so good at what it does. When it comes to size, don't go too far on the size, because I use 2 sizes of drop shot hook. I use a 1/0 and I use a 1. When I'm using really slender baits, and I'll show you guys a few of my favorite baits for drop shotting. Slender baits, I'm going to use that number 1. When I'm fishing the bigger, chunkier baits, the drop shot baits, I'm going to go with a 1/0. So 3 baits that I rely on every spring. I don't need any more than these 3. 1, 2.8-inch rhythm wave. Especially when the boat's moving kind of quick, that tail, or if you do a lot of the lift and fall, it swims down to the bottom and slowly sinks. It's a stone cold killer. Number 2, one that they brought back due to popular demand. See that? That is a Jackal I Shed. That'll get a lot of guys excited because this little bait here used to only be available in a 4.8-inch size. Now it's available in a 3.8, which is this one, and a 2.8, which is going to be an unbelievable perch bait as well. But I digress. So that is the I Shed from Jackal. And the last one is probably our, if you had to ask anybody about a drop shot bait, it would be this one. Crosstail shad. Okay, 4-inch or 3-inch crosstail shad. Colors, again, guys, remember, you're either trying to mimic gobies or you're trying to mimic minnows. The one color that's always been hot from the times I started fishing on Lake Erie has always been something smoke purple. So we have plenty of that in those colors as well. When you're hooking them, now, my opinion on a hook is going to be different than another guy's opinion on a hook is going to be different than another guy's. There is no finite answer as well for hooks. This is from my personal experience. This is the Aaron Martin's 1/0. When it comes to rigging a crosstail shad, 9 times out of 10, I see guys do it this way. So they're going to hook the bait in the nose and they're going to do it that way. Technically, with that tail design, you should be rigging it upside down. This is from my experience anyways. Again, could be completely off base, but I really don't think so. Because when you rig it like that, the crosstail, which is the name of the bait, ends up sitting facing the downward side. So when you're twitching it, the crosstail will actually add more action to it. And they're seeing the color better rather than seeing that laminate of salt that sits on the bottom. So again, natural inclination for most guys to rig this bait is to rig it salt side down, rounded side up. It's actually the other way around. So phenomenal bait. And you can rig it two ways. You can nose hook it, okay, which is going to give it a lot of side-to-side action and movement. Or you could take it and thread it into and then out. So you can get it up your hook a little, and you can get it on like that as well. Okay, that gives you a little more gap in the hook, and you can get the hook a little further down the bait. Two ways to rig it. Doesn't matter what the bait is. If it's the eye shad, I tend to do the eye shad as a little tougher of a bait. I tend to do the eye shad, obviously, light side down. You can see how most of them are laminates. So I got a dark gray back and a silver belly. So I want it to look like a minnow when I rig it. And I'm going to do it that way. Okay, just like that. You can also nose hook it. The cool thing about this bait, because of that tail, it's the eye motion tail, really good on calm days as well, because it doesn't take a lot to get a quiver out of that. And you don't need to overwork your rod. When it comes to a rod, when I'm drop shotting, I want something softer than what I'm dragging with, obviously. My big ones are an X-Pride 7-foot Light Plus. You know, an NRX or an IMX Pro 901 is a great choice as well. I like having that longer rod, that 7'5" or 7'6", sorry, is a lot better in that deeper water with big fish. And again, you know, most guys, when I'm shallow, I fish straight fluorocarbon for drop shotting. But when I'm deep, 5-pound Power Pro. My main line, and I'll actually use a 1,000 size spinning reel. So, because I could put a football field on a 1,000, I don't want to use 600 yards of line to fill up a 2,500. If you prefer having the oversized reel, you can leave some backing on it, because 5-pound takes up zero space on your reel. You can put a lot of 5-pound on a reel. So I'm going to run 5-pound, and I'm either going to run an 8-pound or a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. Again, like I said, I don't fish gentle for them. I like to go at them hard. So 8 or 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. So I've got some of that here as well. So there's my 8 right there. Okay, FC leader. You can also use, I use FC Sniper mainline as well. The difference between mainline fluorocarbon and leader fluorocarbon is the way it's formulated. It's why it's more expensive. Mainline fluorocarbon is designed to be a little more supple, a little softer. So it doesn't really work out as well as a leader, because leaders are meant to have a lot of shock absorption and a lot of knot strength. They're meant to have that stiffness with them. So leader material is just designed completely different than mainline fluorocarbon. I got a question here from McFarlane Music off of the YouTube feed. Braid or fluoro for flipping and pitching. We're going to try to keep this to smallmouth, but I'm going to give you this question anyways. It depends on the fishery, weedy or non-weedy, it doesn't matter. I have both. You need both. In my opinion, I need a rod rigged with 50-pound Power Pro or 65-pound Power Pro for punching and flipping. And when they're being really snarky, I have a rod rigged with 20-pound or 25-pound FC flipping. So I have both, just one of those ways. So here's another good question. We'll keep it on let's keep a couple in a row here. So Rich is asking, eye shad, better in calm water on a drop shot than a rhythm wave with a paddle tail? Yes. Unless you are doing the lift and fall technique, yes, it is. I think the eye shad is really tough to beat as a do-nothing drop shot bait. It just catches fish. It flat out catches fish. So Sean's back again. Do you use a tungsten drop shot weight? Absolutely not. Sorry, guys. I'll show you what I use for weights. I use good old traditional lead. Because, yeah, I understand that you can feel more with tungsten, but I really don't have a problem feeling with drop shot weights in general. Here they are here. So I poured 2 sizes of drop shot weights, guys. Okay, I've got my shallower water stuff, which is my lighter stuff. So, you know, an 1/8, a quarter, up to a quarter would be considered my shallower stuff. But when I'm fishing big, nasty fish on Erie deep, I'm throwing big honkers in lead. And it's always a cylinder. Never the ball. I've never understood why guys in rock situations would ever throw a ball drop shot weight. Ball drop shot weights, I'm trying to keep up to the comments here. Ball drop shot weights have more of a chance of getting stuck in between 2 rocks and wedging than the cylinder does. The only time I ever consider using a ball drop shot weight is when I'm fishing pure sand and I want to have that little ball to puff up the sand a bit to add as an attraction. But 9 times out of 10, probably 9.5 times out of 10, I'm using a cylinder drop shot weight. The other thing I do is I do not rely only on pinching it in that little tab. I pinch it in the tab and then I tie 2 overhand knots. Okay, that's the one thing that I like to do because 2 things happen. Yeah, you're going to lose a lot of drop shot weights in rocky areas, but the worst is when you got a fish on by the boat and he jumps or shakes, and then you fire a missile at your partner in the boat or at yourself. So that's the reason why I tie them. I just make sure I tie a couple overhands as well. So that's my drop shot setup. So again, just to recap, G Finesse drop shot hook, Aaron Martin's, good dude. Number 1 or 1/0 cylinder weights. 5-pound Power Pro is a main line. Sometimes I'll use the 8-pound Super 8 slick as well. 9 times out of 10, 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And I'm using a softer rod. So I'm using that softer, either a 822 DSR from Loomis, which is a 6'10" drop shot rod in medium power, 7-foot Light Plus from X Pride, or a 901 from the NRX line or the IMX Pro line. So, all right, no, Brad. So here's one. I don't know. I haven't seen this video, Brad. He's asking if I saw the David Dudley did on Ned rigs killing thousands of fish. I have not seen that video, unfortunately. I do know that Ned rigs catch a lot of fish. If you guys haven't seen David Dudley's stuff, he was actually up here at the Spring Fishing and Boat Show doing seminars with myself, Jason Barnews, and B-Lat. And he did an awesome thing on wacky rigging. So very, very cool. Very, very cool thing he did there. So I have not seen that, but I will check it out. This one. Okay. VMC spin shot setup. I don't like them. I don't like them one bit. I've tried them. It actually, and I'll be very honest, I'm not sponsored by a hook company whatsoever. You'll see I have Gammies. I've used Eagle Claws. I use Owner. I use Mustad for my jig hooks. I use Gammies for my drop shot hooks. I stopped using VMC hooks for like 4 years because of that VMC spin shot setup. That spin shot, and we're talking about the hooks that have a swivel on the top and then a quick clip on the bottom. I lost so many fish on those hooks. It drove me mental. So for that reason, I'm going to say no. Other guys might have a ton of preference on them. Listen, the one thing I'll say about drop shot is it twists your line like crazy, especially in deep water. Bite the bullet. Every once in a while, cut your setup off, let a bunch of line out behind the boat, troll it out behind the boat, get the twist out, and retie. Or if you don't want to worry about the twist so much, use a bait caster. So 2 options there. All right, so where are we going with this? Oh, tying the drop shot hook before I leave drop shot. If I can find my drop shot hook, it was here. I'm going to use another. I'll show you on another hook that I've used in the past for drop shotting that works pretty well. Now, this is an Eagle Claw wacky rig hook. One thing you're going to look for with, let's get that off of there, sorry. One thing you're going to look for is the eye position. I like the eye just slightly bent back. So when I pick a drop shot hook, you can see even the Aaron Martin's one, okay, the eye is just slightly bent back. The reason being is just it's for the posture of the hook. Because when you tie it and the eye is flat, it just puts that hook point exactly where you want to do it. This is going to go right along with it. I'm going to leave this question up here and I'll answer it as soon as I'm done with the hooks. When you're tying, I think Aaron does some ridiculous, crazy double Albright thing for his. I do a Palomar, but the important part is wherever my leader is, I bring it down through the top of the eye and through again so that it ensures that hook sits in the upright position. If you tie just a straight Palomar, your hook's going to end up rolling over on itself, and you don't want that. You don't want to tongue hook the smallmouth. You want to make sure your presentation is sitting properly. So Palomar with the tag end through the top, pull down, then tie your weight on. That'll ensure that hook sits exactly upright. So the question is, what are your thoughts on drop shot leader lengths? This is completely subjective to the day as well. I've been on the water on Lake St. Clair and had Richie Tripp absolutely hand me my rear end fishing a 3-foot leader length. Some days the fish are up there. My starting point is always 14 to 16 inches, and I go from there. If I'm casting further out, so I'm working the bait on long casts, I'll use a longer leader length because based on the angle, okay, based on the angle, it's a simple, you're going to be closer to the bottom, so that extra leader length will really help. If I'm fishing real tight, accurate stuff, I'm using a short leader length, 6-8 inches at most. So it depends on how you're fishing your bait most times. If you're marking the fish super high off bottom, like 2-3 feet off, don't be afraid to tie a 3 or 4 foot leader length. It could actually work really well for you. All right, so here's one. Patrick's asking the Stratic CI4 versus the FL. So technically, the CI4s were designed as a low startup inertia reel. So here's a CI4 right here. This is a CI4 reinforced carbon interfusion reel. Very lightweight. Not lacking in strength at all, but really designed as a low startup inertia reel. So I consider anything I'm doing finessey, I'm going to use the CI4s. Now, the Stratic FL is a completely different beast. All metal body, really designed for when you're banging hard. You want to fish baits that are really like dragging tubes, dragging football heads, you know, setting the hook with straight braid or braid with a heavy floral leader. That's when I go to the FLs. So if I'm looking for something to balance better and be a little finessey, I go Stratic CI4. When I'm looking for something a little harder hitting, I go Stratic FL. So hopefully that helps. I somehow think you knew that though, Patrick, because you're a pretty smart kid and you know what you're doing. Okay, so here's another one. What do you recommend for Ned and Wacky style in a casting model? Okay, and I figured you were looking for casting there. So Dwayne, Ned and Wacky style, I like the medium power rods. Okay, I think medium light, depending what you're fishing, medium light as a minimum, medium as a maximum. I would not go medium heavy unless you are telling me you're going to be wacky rigging and throwing it up with a weedless wacky rig into trees and into heavy structure or into pads. Then I'd say you need to go wacky rigging with a medium heavy. But for the most part, I think a medium power rod will get you done in most situations. And if you're fishing open water, I like having the longer rod. So I throw a lot of 892s and 891s. So I'm throwing that 7'5", but 7 foot to 7'6" is kind of the area I like to stay in. Again, rod length is completely subjective to the user. I am 6 feet tall. I like using rods. None of my rods really are under 6'10". Okay, so one thing you want to do when you're doing that is always consider what you're used to using. But longer rods in open water are going to give you two things. They're going to give you longer distance casting. They're absolutely going to give you better hook setting power because you're picking up more line when you're setting the hook on it. And you know, it's just you're not going to have as much leverage as a short stiff rod. But I feel like the action and the fight you get out of a longer rod is far supersedes the need for leverage when you're fighting wacky rigging bass. I mean, they're not tuna we're fighting, they're bass. So anyways. All right, and you said for largemouth right there. I just got your comment. So yeah, so for largemouth, like I said, I would go medium power. That's what I use the most. So anything 7 foot to 7'6", medium power, fast action at a minimum, extra fast is fine as well, is going to work really well. So got another question here from Bobo about fave crankbait for big smallies. All right, so we've done drop shot. Just a quick recap on the drop shot before we leave it alone. Top baits, crosstail shad. I Shed 3.8 or 2.8, Jackal Rhythm Wave 2.8. So let's move over to big cranks. I got a big crank set up here. So this is kind of cool. So we used to have big cranks back in the day with Jackal. There was a bunch of them on the market, but I have one that I use. And I'm going to give John Cruz a shout out because this little bad boy is a flat out catcher. This is a Spro Little John DD. You can see right here. It's horrible light, but anyways, you can see that. So this will actually hit 17 to 20 feet on a cast. But my setup is always the same when I'm doing stuff like this. Okay, so this is, I'm going to fish all the time with a bigger, longer rod when I'm throwing big, deep cranks on Erie. And Bobo and I have actually fished big cranks together. I like to throw 7'6" to 7'11", and I like to throw like one of my favorites is a 906 CBR, which is a crankbait specific rod from G Loomis. IMX Pro has it in that model. It's got a good long back grip, and it's got a lot of power. It's 7'6". Up to 7'11" is what I'm going to look for. I try to always look for something that's got a little bit more of a moderate action, especially for smallmouth, because there's two differences when I fish crankbaits. When I'm fishing crankbaits in a weed situation, I want to have probably a fast action rod or a moderate fast at the slowest rod. And the reason I want that is because when I cast out there and I get caught in the weeds, I want to have that stiffer blank to be able to snap the bait free of the weeds. But whenever I'm fishing rock with cranks, I go to a softer rod. So you want that moderate action. And for that, either I go Zodius, I can go X-Pride. They have specific glass cranking rods designed for that. Or I'm going to go G. Loomis and go to the 906 CBR. Or for the big cranks, I'm going to go to their big 711s and fish those. When I'm fishing line, I know a lot of guys like to fish braid. I'm not a big braid guy when it comes to crankbaits. All right. It's just been one of those things that I just don't have a lot of confidence. I find I bump a lot of fish and I don't hook a lot of fish because of the lack of stretch in braided line. So for me, it's been, I throw a fluorocarbon that is actually crank specific. So that's Sunline FC crank. A word of advice to you guys if you're going to be cranking, trying to get depths. If you go too heavy on your fluorocarbon or your mono, you're going to sacrifice depth. If a bait is rated to dive 20 feet, it's rated on 10-pound test. It's not rated on 12. It's not rated on 14. It's not rated on 16. The higher you go in the pound test, the shallower that bait's going to run on a cast. And the only way you're going to achieve that depth when you go higher in pound test is to stroll away from the bait once you cast it, get it way out there, and then start cranking it. It's going to need time to dig down. So I throw 10, 12, and 14 are my 3 cranking line pound tests. 10 when I'm looking for super deep or I'm throwing smaller cranks in shallow. 12 is my all-around, or I'm throwing a big plug like that Little John DD that weighs like 3/4 of an ounce or an ounce. And then 14 is kind of my jack of all trades cranking line, especially when I'm doing stuff like square billing or I'm throwing, you know, baits like what I got here, and which is another one that I throw a lot of, especially when the fish start moving shallow, is the chubble, something like this. You know, when you're throwing baits like this, like little coffin bill, square bill, stuff like that, I'm going to run the 14. But for the deep cranking, and again, I said my favorite bait is the Spro Little John DD. There's a bunch of great deep cranks on the market, hard to beat, Normans as well. I throw them on a longer rod so I can get extra casting distance, and I can put that tip down in the water to help with depth. And I make sure I throw moderate because I want it to bounce and deflect easily off the rock without getting caught in it. And that's the setups I basically use for that. Okay, so that's my cranking setup. Another thing we do a lot of in the spring and in the fall is blade baiting. And I've got a bunch of them stuck together here. So again, when you're doing blades, this is the new Jackal Keyburn. Okay, this blade here, right here, get it out of the snap. All right, that's the Keyburn. Okay, Jackal Keyburn is available in 3/8 and 1/2 ounce. And, you know, 1/2 ounce is something I would throw either on straight fluoro on casting. So I'll use like a 7-1 medium extra fast rod on casting, straight fluoro, like 14-pound test is the way I typically fish it in the fall. Corey's asking me about the MC60. Yes, of course, the MC60, but we're talking deep cranks right now. But this thing here, I'm going to throw this on spinning because I can launch it on 8-pound Power Pro with a fluorocarbon leader. I could throw this bait a country mile, 1/2 ounce. And the way you work a blade, blades really work well in cold water situations, whether it's spring or fall. The way you work a blade on Erie for us is really that lift and fall. It's a pendulum technique. But what we're looking to do is on the lift, you'll feel this blade vibrate on the way up, and then it'll fall down and land right here because it's got all its weight is really nose centric on it. And the cool thing about this bait, if you hear it, it's got a circuit board body to it. So the vibration is fast and hard on this bait. Again, I'm picking minnow colors. If I'm fishing a blade bait, I'm throwing golds, I'm throwing silvers, I'm throwing anything that looks herring-like or smelt-like or emerald shiner-like. So there's one of my other blades. And the setup, again, what you notice here, guys, as well, you see this little interesting hook design they got on this thing. It's actually a double hooks backwards. That's really going to help on those long casts, not hooking up on the bottom. The last thing you want to do is keep hooking up shell and hooking up rocks and losing your baits. So that little backwards hook helps quite a bit. It swings back when it hits the bottom. You don't snag anything when you go to lift it. So it's a good bait to do that as well. The other bait I'm incredibly excited about throwing this spring, and I used it last fall. We got to test it. I used it in the spring, actually, for walleye. Did really well on it. I've used it ice fishing. I've used it a number of ways, and I used it for walleye a lot and figured them out good on it, was the Jackal Daracoup. Okay. So the Deracoup is a tungsten tail spinner, single hook, and has a ton of action. This is a 3/4 ounce model. There is a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce, and 1 ounce version. So they get really big and chunky as well. You can see here, I got a 1 ounce. These I throw, when I'm throwing the 1/2 ounce, I throw them on spinning, but anything above that, 3/4 and 1/2 and 1 ounce, I'm throwing them on casting. Okay. The way you work these things is going to help in a lot of ways. So basically, the way I throw them, and I've done best with them, and I've done it a bunch of times, is the pendulum technique. And I talk about the pendulum technique a lot. I talk about it when I'm perch fishing. I talk about it when I'm throwing swim baits. I talk about it when I'm throwing blades. But the pendulum is basically when you lift your rod, you don't lift your rod and then drop it again so the bait comes up and then drops straight down. What you're doing is you're lifting your rod and you're holding it there. So your bait goes up and then your bait comes down towards you. And when this bait comes up, the tail is spinning. And when it pendulums towards you, the tail is spinning. 99.5% of your bites are going to come near the bottom of that fall. Or if you pause for a second on the bottom, sitting on the bottom, they're going to eat it. Okay? The colder the water, the slower you're going to want to move that thing. The faster the water, obviously, or the warmer the water, the faster you can move that thing. So it's a bunch of different ways you can do it. So the Jackal Deracoup is one that I'm going to be looking forward to working this spring as well for them. And the walleye love it. And if we talk about the walleye a little bit, there are so many walleye in Lake Erie right now. There's a ton of them. And basically, the walleye are everywhere. Yes, the Western Basin has a ton of walleye, but oh my God, last year I caught walleye in the spring on everything from 35 feet of water dragging a football head to 5 feet of water on a shovel crankbait. They're everywhere, and they're great eating, by the way. And there's no slot size on Erie. So if you do catch a walleye, have fun, enjoy. They're delicious. Let's go to a couple questions here right away. Andy, so aside from infused scent, do you put on any additional? No, I do not. I spoke about it earlier. I'm not a giant believer in scent. If the bait has it, like a lot of Jackal baits have that shrimp scent in it, I don't worry about it. It doesn't freak me out. I know it works, but I'm also not a guy that will stop every time I cast to put scent on. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Some guys believe it. The bottom line is if it gives you more confidence and you're using scent, use it. The only time I would say scent might help is on really slow moving baits. And if you're like a smoker or you have gas on your hands or something along those lines, maybe it would help. But I'm not a giant proponent of scent. It's not like I can't make a cast without it. I actually don't have a single bottle of scent in my boat. So if that tells you anything. What do we got here? So Corey was referring to this. For years, this was my little secret, the MC60. So Jackal has a little crankbait. I can actually find it while we're talking. Jackal has a little crankbait. Hopefully it's on their site. The MC60. And it's a medium diving. This is the MR we're talking about. It is a awesome little crankbait. And it's not even on their site. So, but they discontinued it probably around 4 years ago. So I bought up all the inventory that we had in our warehouse. And for good reason, because I catch a lot of fish on it. Well, they're bringing it back with 6 new colors, I believe. So let's see. He's got it. There's the blade. Hey, Bill, since you're so good at checking links here, if you can fire me up, find me the MC60, that'd be awesome. So this bait here is a perfect, I'd say 5 to 7 foot deep running bait, depending on your pound test. And it is an absolute fish catcher. So yes, Corey, I do throw the MC60 quite a bit. I know you love it as well. I was trying to keep that under my hat for a little while, but you guys have just blown it out of the water. So enough of that. All right. So here's another one from McFarland Muscle. All right. So I know it's for Erie, but for our home lake, Simcoe, what forage do you try to mimic? Simcoe has become a goby lake. Goby and crayfish are the 2 primary forages now, without a doubt. I mean, I wouldn't say any other thing. Yes, they still feed on emeralds, especially in the fall or early in the spring. They're going to come into the shallows looking to feed on smelt and emerald shiner. And yes, there's a population of smallmouth that are what we call pelagic that will spend all summer suspended on smelt and herring and everything else. But the ones that you're seeing on the shoals, like on Thora, like on Woodsman or on, anything in the North End or on Georgina, they're either eating craw or they're eating gobies, and they love gobies. So green pumpkin, anything. Green pumpkin light blue swirl, green pumpkin gold, pumpkin seed, watermelon, yes, yes, and yes. So that's what I concentrate on Simcoe on. Here's one for, yes, one of my favorite ways to catch them on Erie is a jigging spoon. Again, just like a drop shot, just like a football head, just like a blade bait, not every day is going to be a jigging spoon day. I think if you went around and threw a spoon all day long, you would catch every day on Erie, but there's certain times and windows where the jigging spoon is really working. What I find is when they're stacked up on transitions and deeper, the jigging spoon is even better than when they move in shallower. So for me, when I throw a jigging spoon, I like to throw 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce are the two most popular sizes I throw. And when I throw them, believe it or not, I like to throw them on straight fluoro, on bait casting. And the reason being is because I find that you hook them better when you're using fluoro and you get less tangles when you're using fluoro. A lot of times when you throw a jigging spoon on braid with a fluoro leader, because the braid has so little stretch, you can inflict so much action in that jigging spoon that it'll actually jump up past where your line is and actually hit that. So straight fluoro, 14 or 16 pound test on a medium power, extra fast rod. And that's what I like to throw my thing on. So here's the link from Bill. And let's see if I can hit this. Yeah, so there it is there. So if you're looking for Jackal Lure's new MC60, thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. So it is on Facebook. So we have talked about, let me just check my list here. We've been talking a while now, but it's good. Been steady, 130 to 150 people. Guys, again, if you can share this, obviously you'll help us out. Oh, here's a great one to talk about, using guides. If you've never been to Erie, you're in very good luck. And I know of a bunch of guides that run services both out of the US and out of Canada. One of the best, without a doubt, from the Canadian side is definitely Paul Castellano. One of the best that I know of on the US side is Joe Fonzie. So I think it's thumbs up guide service. If you've never been there, take a guide out. Take a look at what the program is. Find out how they're fishing the areas. I mean, it's a great way to adjust the learning curve because there's a couple things on Erie you have to be worried about. One is the weather. Lake Erie is not Lake Simcoe. It is not Kawartha Lakes Lake. It gets rough. So speaking of weather, while we're talking about using a guide, let's go to my trusty thing, and I'll show you guys what apps I use for weather. So let's go to this page here. And so I use two apps or two websites for weather. And this is, one is windy.com and the other one is windfinder.com. So with Windy, you can see I can zoom into an area. But what I like about it, Windy, when you keep it out, you can actually see the movement of the wind. So if I go to the bottom here and move this to, what's it going to be like Thursday evening? Yeah, not good. There's going to be 6 to 8 footers on Lake Erie. So the bad winds on Erie are coming from the west primarily, southwest, northwest. Anything with a W in it, you're in a lot of trouble. Anything with a W in it and over 15 kilometers an hour, in my opinion, or 10 miles an hour, it's going to be lumpy out there. Okay, so that's the first part. But when you start getting stuff from the south, which is the primary best wind you can get from Erie, you can see here on Thursday, there's going to be at 6 a.m. So Thursday is going to be a great day from the south. Low winds, 7 knots, southbound. Again, we're fishing this area here. You really want south, southeast. North is okay if it's not too strong, but it still has 8 or 9 miles to come across from the Canadian side. And then east winds are obviously good, especially if you're fishing in front of the windmills in Buffalo. Okay, it becomes really flat calm. So you want that wind coming from this side of the lake 9 days out of 10, so you can see that. Okay, so that's one of them. The other one I use is Windfinder. Now, Windfinder has the same feature. Okay, so you can see this. And on the bottom here, you can pick your day. I want to go fishing on the 30th, so that's next Monday. I'm okay with this because you can see here by the color, the winds, even though they're coming from the west, are in that blue shade, so they're like 8 knots. Probably be 2 footers on the lake. Something you want to look for. What I also do is I keep favorites on certain areas. So this is Sturgeon Point. This is Dunkirk. This is one of the areas that you'll get the best report for is Lake Erie, Hamburg Beach. I'll look at the forecast, and then I can see based on the wind direction, like this is peach right here. This is what you're looking for. 45 degrees, 3-knot winds, 3-mile-per-hour winds max, coming from the west, veering northwest, veering northeast. Okay, so that's kind of like a perfect place to do it. So yes, Steph, it is exactly similar to Lake O. West wind is scary. West wind is the devil. If you're a Great Lakes fisherman, the west wind is the devil. It's the devil on practically every Great Lake. So be very, very careful. If you're going out there, start watching the winds a few days before you go and keep getting up to date, and have the app on your phone as well, because the last thing you're going to want to do in 40-degree water is get caught with something switching hard west. You don't see it coming. You're 10 miles from Buffalo and you got to make your way back. Surfing a wave is not fun, especially in cold water. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you posting both of those pages. So that's what I do basically for when I'm looking for weather. Okay, so that's a pretty simple way to look at it. So I use windy.com and I use windfinder.com. And yes, there's other apps. And again, guys, trust other apps. Those are the ones that I really trust. So again, going back to my list here, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them up here. Yeah, unfortunately, Dwayne, you're right. It is the most dominant wind. Okay. Controlled drifting versus aimless drifting. Let's go back to the Navionics app, and I want to talk about this. So this is another thing I see a lot of on Lake Erie, especially in the spring. So let's go to this. Let's pull up this area right here. Okay. A lot of people will drift this area right here, these set of contours. Okay, this is just the Pinehurst, Wanaka, Hamburg area. It's a community zone. Back in the day, it was more of a secret sauce, but it's kind of community zone now. But the difference between the aimless driftings and the controlled drifting is massive if you want to catch numbers and quality. I see a ton of guys that see a bunch of boats. Again, we talk about this bass boat pattern that we talked about at the beginning of the show, and they drive into the pack and trolling motor's not even down, or the trolling motor's down and they're not making any adjustments, and they're at the mercy of the direction of the wind. So if the wind is a south-southwest and it's coming this way across, they're basically starting in 16 feet of water, drifting out to 30 feet of water. And the fish are sitting in 22 feet of water at that time of the day, and they catch 1 or 2 bites on the way out, but they drift for 30 minutes every time. Using your trolling motor and using side imaging and using even your autopilot is a great advantage. So on a Minn Kota trolling motor, that end with the arrow is autopilot. And so even though the wind might be coming this way or coming this way, if you set your autopilot and point the head of your trolling motor down the run you want to be on, whether it's 21 to 23 drop, or it's the 27 to 29 drop, or it's the 14 to 16 drop, whatever it is the fish are on that day, being in control of your drift will get you bit way more than random drifting. Okay, when you start doing this, I mean, look at the little things that happen out here. Look at these little turns. So you'll get guys that'll come in and just go right across this. They'll come right across it. So they'll get a fish right here. And then they'll get nothing. Or they're going to be on the deeper stuff, right? And they're going to be out on this 21 ledge. And they're going to come across and catch, and then nothing. Use your autopilot or use your troller and stay on that contour. Make sure you're within that 2-foot area of that contour, because that really is going to lead to you catching more fish at the end of the day if you go out there. This is one, I mean, I can't speak to this because I'm a Humminbird user. I've been a Humminbird user forever. I started with Lowrance, went to Humminbird probably in 2004, just before side imaging came out. And then since side imaging, I have not gone back. I know a lot of guys who love Garmin. I know a lot of guys who use it. For me, I am no doubt, shadow of a doubt, Humminbird user. I think the side imaging is bar none the best. I think AutoChart Live works great. It's just a great system. So that's my 2 cents anyways, for what it's worth. I know guys catch fish with every unit, but for me, it's Humminbird. And the reason it's also Humminbird, I almost forgot about this, is LakeMaster. If you don't have a LakeMaster Humminbird chart for Lake Erie, man, are you missing the boat. You see what I'm looking at with, Navionics. Yeah, there's random contours. Every single rock pile on that lake is on the actual LakeMaster Lake Erie chart. So that is another very good reason for pushing towards Humminbird. The LakeMaster charts are unparalleled in the market. let's see. What gear ratio do I use? Hey, Billy, for crankbaits. So, you know, the gear ratio thing on reels has really changed. Back in the day when I started, 4-point-something to 1s were the normal cranking reel. And now the lowest you can get really from the Shimano family is a 6.4 to 1 or 6.5 to 1 or 6.3 to 1. And I'm fine with that. I just use whatever the lowest is. And in this case, it's usually a 6 to 1. The one thing I do know, because when I'm throwing the big cranks out there for the smallmouth, I'm making super long casts. Remember, as your spool size gets diminished, so you're at the end of your cast and you have less line in your spool, your crank speed or your inches of line per handle turn are a lot lower than what they're going to be when the spool's full. So what I try to remember is that I go by feel on the crankbait. I want that certain wobble, that certain feeling, but as it gets closer to the boat, I tend to slow down because my spool is filling up and my inches of line per handle turn is increasing. Yes, I know it's geeky. It's the stupid things that I think about, but those are the little things sometimes on a specific crankbait that make a big difference. Bill, spot lock and autopilot are your best friends. You are preaching. It is unbelievable. And again, I get a lot of questions on other stuff like this from Bill about thoughts on Plan Optics. I've seen it ice fishing. I think it's incredible. I don't know its use when I'm doing this kind of stuff. I think it'd be cool to see a fish coming, but I'm so focused when I fish on other things that I'd have a hard time, I think, with what I do to put my eyes on a screen while I'm fishing. I feel like it'd be the equivalent of being blindfolded. Even though you hear guys talk about it, they say it's great. I don't know. It might be the greatest thing in the world. I've never used it when I'm fishing, so my opinion is worth squat. How about that, Bill? Yeah, so Brad's asking this one. So they need a Bluetooth app that allows you to use your phone as a keyboard to label your waypoints on birds bad. I agree, but if you have a PC and you get Humminbird PC, it is super easy to name your waypoints. I remember the first time I did it because when you have a ton of waypoints, like I was getting after a while, I had 4,000 or 5,000 waypoints. They tend to slow your units down. So after years of collecting waypoints, I decided to take Humminbird PC, open it up, and actually take 11 hours to organize everything by lake. So what I've done and the way I organize my waypoints is a little different than most people do. Is I've actually separated by region. So Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair is a chip. Inland or U.S. waters are a chip. Simcoe, Georgian Bay is a chip. And then if you're doing Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence, that's a chip. And then everything inland in Ontario is a chip. So I have 6 chips. And I actually label them on Humminbird PC, which makes it a lot easier. So Brad, I would try that if I were you. But I agree with you. It's very tough to do on the unit. Marco. So what do you do to narrow down a pattern the fish will be in on a given day? Depth, structure, pattern. So the first thing I try to do is use my graph to determine depth. Structure is usually 90% of the time the same thing. It's transitions. If you roll the dice on transitions, you will absolutely find fish. Sometimes they're on rock piles, yes. But 9 times out of 10, they're on transitions. So start with transitions, find them. Find them from 16 all the way out to 30 feet of water, and then it's just time. They're either eating on the bottom a football head swim bait or a craw or dragging a tube, or they're a little more snarkish and they want a drop shot swim bait, drop shot cross tail, something along those lines. But, you know, when they don't eat any of those things, I find those are the days that, you know, you get on a jigging spoon or a blade bite, or you might even do better on a deep crankbait. I've had days where I've rolled into the Buffalo dumping grounds and there's 80 boats out there. The wind is low, nobody's catching, and I throw a deep diving crankbait and absolutely whack them. So always have a couple of things outside of the box, especially when you're fishing in a pack, because being different is really helpful when you're doing that. So Sean's asking, is there a follow the contour feature? Yes, if you have an iPilot Link trolling motor, so an Ultrex or a Tarova or an Altera with Link, you can follow your contours on either maps that you've built with AutoChart Live or on the LakeMaster charts. It will actually read the contours on LakeMaster, which is very good because the LakeMasters are so damn accurate. I mean, being able to stay on them is a big thing. So yes, if you're using, but it has to have iPilot Link. You have to have a Ethernet hub in your boat where you have your trolling motor into the hub, your units into the hub, and then that allows the trolling motor to read the unit. So anyways. Again, geeky, but that's kind of the thing. So let's go back to the list. So we talked about ethics. We talked about contour fishing versus drifting. So when do the fish start moving? First and foremost, if you're fishing a derby out there or you want to put a fish in your box on Lake Erie during the spring, understand there's a 20-inch trophy limit until bass opens in June. It has to be over 20 inches. Most bump boards in your bass boats are 18 inches. So get yourself a 20-inch bump board or have a measuring stick. Okay, so make sure of those two things. But 20-inch minimum, only 2 fish. Guys, if you're catching them deep, don't put them in your live well to take the glory picture and stick 4 fingers up 4 gills at the end of the day. Take a picture of the fish when you get it. Let it go. It will absolutely, absolutely be beneficial to the fish not to be put in a live well and put under undue stress and have barrel trauma if you don't know how to fizz especially. But if you can avoid putting them in a live well, even if they're 22 inches, take your pictures, let it go. It's going to go back down to the bottom, especially if you catch it in over 20 feet of water, and give it a chance because that fish is getting ready to spawn. That's a big, big fish if you're taking a picture of it. So where do they go and when? So water temperature is going to dictate where you're going to approach the actual location of them. So it's going to start in high 30s and the fish are going to be slow. But as it starts creeping to the 50s, 50 is like kind of the magic number. When I see 50 degrees, in the back of my head, I'm thinking 16 and in is a possibility. There will still be fish out. Remember, they don't all come in at one time. But when the water hits 50, you have that chance of catching them on things like this. And this is one of my favorite ways to catch them because, boy, when they eat it, it is a rip your arm out kind of hit. But deep diving jerk baits. And unfortunately, we do not make this one anymore. If you find them, they're incredible. It's a Dow's Vito from Jackal. This is a great deep diving jerk bait. Suspending jerk baits when the water's in the 50s, all the way up into 6 feet of water if they're feeding. So that's when I start turning the switch from staying off the 20 plus feet of water to heading inward towards, rock shoals and boulder fields looking in the shallows is when that water gets into the 50s. Now, when you need to start thinking about when they're going to be spawning. So for smallmouth in general, once the water gets into the high 50s, that's when things are going to start moving. But the majority are going to spawn in 63 to 67 degree water around a full moon. So, but they have been known to get on beds in the high 50s. So don't be shy of that. Smallmouth on Erie will spawn everywhere from shallow dumb ones that you see sitting on a cinder block in 5 feet of water or 4 feet of water, all the way out to 25 feet of water. I've seen them spawning, and I've seen the beds. On a clear day, you can absolutely see the beds in those deeper sections. So I find the most fish on Erie that I've seen spawning in areas are usually from like that 16 to 15 or 16 to 12 foot of water. Seems to be the prime area for the big ones to spawn in. They love that kind of depth there. And the reason they do so much isn't because they're different than any other fish. They just don't have a choice. When you get a 50K or 50 mile an hour wind from the west, you better be 14 feet down or your bed's going to get swept clean. So the shallow ones, traditionally, you'll find them in more protected areas, like in behind Buffalo Small Boat Harbor or in Dunkirk Harbor. That's where you're going to get your super shallow spawners. They've got a protected niche that they're going to be in. But the main lake spawners on those drops are going to be 13 feet, 12 feet, or deeper to 24 feet from what I've experienced anyways. So that's kind of the spawning thing. Bait casters versus spinning. It's totally up to your person. The reason I choose the different ones is 2 reasons. When you're catching a lot of fish on Erie, the bait caster is really going to help a lot on your arm pressure, because when you hold a bait caster, I'm going to turn sideways for this. When you hold a bait caster, the rod is locked up under your forearm, okay? Your thumb is on top. You're using bicep. When you grab a spinning rod, my hand is like this, so I've got in between my 2 fingers, 1 finger up on the blank. Again, the handle is locked up under my forearm. You can see I do that on both for leverage. But at this point, I'm not using my bicep anymore. I'm using this part right here. And when you fish braid a lot, you can put a lot of pressure on this area here. So that's the one thing I do. So that's why I throw bait caster a lot. I find I can lean a lot harder, and I'm using a bigger muscle because right here, You got a bunch of forearm muscle, but this is the problem areas right here, especially with braid, especially with a lot of hook setting, is you got a lot of small bones that make up the wrist section, and you can put a lot of stress on them. So last thing I want to do is hurt myself early, especially when the fish are on fire. I mean, listen, a bad day on Erie, if things are right, you're going to catch yourself a dozen fish, maybe 20. On a good day, you can catch 60, 80, 100, depending on how good they're going. So here's one from Crowley. Do you do any sea rigging out there? You know what, Todd? I honestly don't. I've tried. I can't get them to go, and some guys might. It's not like other areas I've fished. It's not like if you put me on Champlain, you put me on the St. Lawrence, I'm going to do sea rigging. Yeah, then you're going to catch on them. But for some reason out on Erie, they're not big on the sea rig. Not that I've found. Maybe someone else is a lot better at it than I am, and they've figured it out, but for me, it's not one thing that I've actually done a lot of times. So trying to see if I've talked about everything I needed to talk about. So basically, guys, I think we covered everything, and I think it's a good primer. I don't even know how long I've been talking to, but okay, here's one here. We'll get this question right here. Talk a lot about USA side due to season, but when the season opens, do you like the Canadian side by Point Abino? Yeah, Point Abino is absolutely a fish magnet. And, you know, the nice thing about Point Abino, for those who don't know, do a quick look, and I'll show you Point Abino. Zoom out and drag across the lake. So here's the Canadian side right here. There's Point Abino. Hard not to see Point Abino. The nice thing about Point Abino is, yeah, you get a lot of shallow fish. So by the time bass opens on the Canadian side, we're talking about the 4th Saturday in June. I mean, these fish, and the reason they do that is to give them a chance to spawn. There's a lot of spawners still out there that time of year, but nice thing about Abino is you have your areas you can catch shallow fish, but you also have your areas where post-spawn or pre-spawn fish will be out off of the deeper sections. The other thing about Abino, especially in this area here or this area here off the steep drops in 50 feet of water, awesome for yellow perch fishing. So it's a twofold. You can do both. If you are fishing in Abino, do not get caught before the 4th Saturday, June in tight. This whole area in here is technically a sanctuary as well. So once you get into this area in here, these are sanctuaries, fish sanctuaries before the season opens. So you shouldn't even be in there saying you're going for perch. Another question here, Gabe. When would you start fishing Erie? As soon as I can, get out there with safe water and clarity. Oh, that's one thing you want to talk about, clarity. A quick zoom over. Let's go back to this. All right, so here's the Modus page we talked about earlier. This is how I see my satellite imagery. So if I click on Lake Erie, you have to wait for a clear day to get a good shot. Okay, Gabe? So let me just hide that so you guys can see this. Here's a great shot of Erie from the other day. This was the 22nd. So this was today at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So there is Lake Erie. See the color? The one challenge you get with Lake Erie is the entire southern shore is full of tributaries. Good ones for steelhead, by the way, like the Cattaraugus and Silver Creek and all these tributaries, Canada Way Creek and. But when it rains in that area, okay, when it actually rains, so when you get a big rainfall, it's the Allegheny Mountains dumping in, and I mean, the water comes in, trees end up in the water, and mud ends up in the water. So if you're heading out for the first time and you haven't experienced this, if you've been out there, you've seen this. But, I mean, a big rain will actually send full-size trees out floating in the water. If you see the muddy water on the satellite before you go, it's going to be a lot tougher fishing. Now, if it's fresh, it just happened the night before, a lot of that mud you see when you roll into an area is just surface. It hasn't fully mixed throughout the water column, but for the most part, when you see the mud like you see here, you might have a foot of viz here in what you saw in that image. So I would start as soon as the winds are low, because you really don't want to be moving too fast this time of year when the water's in the high 30s or mid 30s, and when the water's clear. It gives the chance of a fish a better chance. One about Mega 360. Mega 360 is a different beast altogether, because on Erie, when you're dragging, I don't find it as useful as when I'm fishing target casting. Where I find Mega 360 to be absolutely spot on is when I'm target casting areas. So I'm trolling along, and it gives you eyes ahead of the boat. Unlike side imaging is things that have happened and are past you. Mega 360 is what's in front of you. And that's the big difference. So using Mega 360, I find works best when I'm actually on the trolling motor, moving and fishing. And even when I'm doing a drift, if I'm controlled drifting with a trolling motor and I'm actually going down a line and I have Mega running in the front, I could see that boulder off to the right or off to the left or straight ahead and make that cast ahead of time. So more for what's coming at you than what's behind you. I think side imaging, Mega 3 or the Mega DI or Mega SI, sorry, is far better for finding the transitions that I'm looking for. But if the wind is flat calm and you're on the troller, that's when Mega 360 will really show up really well. Chris is asking, I missed it, but what do you do for a sea rig? I don't on Erie. If I do fish a sea rig, I throw it on a CRR, a CCR Carolina rig rod from Loomis, or I'll throw it on like a 903 CBR in big water situations, which is a 7.6 medium heavy fast action rod. But I don't do it on Erie at all. So that's basically what we do here. So anyways, guys, I think I've talked for quite a while. I think I've been talking for a while, but I'm kind of dry. But I think if anybody has any other questions, obviously I would appreciate if you guys shared this. It'd be helpful to us. I want to keep this going. We've been over 100 people the entire time, which is absolutely phenomenal. I appreciate everybody for hanging. But yeah, let's do this again. We're stuck inside. We got nothing to do but talk fishing. I love talking fishing. I really do. And hopefully you guys love listening to fishing. If I can help you guys out with some questions, that's great. I'm going to do this for another couple minutes. I'm going to answer the next couple questions that come in. But for the most part, guys, I want to keep doing this. Let me know what you want to hear about next. That would be the awesome thing. Let me know what you guys want to talk about. If it's flipping a jig, no, it's not a quarantini, Sean. It's lemon water. I'm trying to save myself. Quarantini for after the show. Got to be responsible during, though. Okay, so here's a couple more before we run out. Hey, JP, thanks for the time and info. Love talking, learning. Okay, awesome. I love it, Troy. I do most smallie fishing in G-Bay, and the season isn't open until late June. What are the best areas to target post-spawn? So G-Bay fish are kind of different, Troy, than any other fish, smallmouth, that I really go after because they love to be so shallow. I find the deep ones are incredibly hard to target there because they're so pelagic. But I like to target sand rock areas off of islands is typically the best thing. So depending where you are in G-Bay, anywhere you find a big sand flat that has isolated boulders around and deep water nearby is a great place to, and the way we find them, the easiest way is either by throwing a reaction bait like a 3.8 rhythm wave on an open hook. So I'll throw it on like a 3/8 and cast it and reel it like a spinnerbait or a jerkbait. Cranks work really well on them as well. So focus in on areas that have that sand with boulders or rock piles scattered on it. And those will be areas post-spawn that they're going to back off to and feed off of. So anyways, that's my 2 cents on G-Bay. But tons of area. I know a lot of guys that catch them deep. We got another one. Can you cross the border with the current restrictions even though you're not landing? That's a question we don't know the answer to, A&D, unfortunately. I don't know. I'm not going to give people a recommendation to do it. So, it's something that I'm optimistic that this is going to follow traditional flu patterns, and by the middle of April should be tapering or flattening, as they say. The new term, I guess, is flattening the curve. So I'm hoping that this is going to happen because it is really, this time of year, if you want to sneak out to Erie, it's tough fishing. You're going to catch, but it's tough. But by the middle to end of April, if the weather conditions happen the way they are, and just to make people smile a little more, I'm going to fire up that picture of Simcoe again. So let's see if I got that. That is not Simcoe. That is the chocolate milk factory known as Lake St. Clair. So I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to let you guys see this again. Let's go full screen. So for those of you who don't realize where we are in the world right now, but the north is thawing. That's Simcoe. This right here, my friends, is open water. So we got a lot of perch fishing to do before I got to worry about this. But you can see here, this is Scugog. It's got open water. Out off the point where those snowmobilers kept going in this winter is open again because of the current. Rice Lake is 50% open. This is Buckhorn. It's open. This is a part of Sturgeon over by Bob Cajun. This part right here has got open water rolling into Pigeon. So you know what, guys? This is actually Catchawanuka, I believe. This is open as well. So And the other thing is, there is no limit on walleye or season on walleye, close season on walleye in Lake Erie. So we've got a few things that are going to be happening relatively soon. So let's not try to rush. I would say let's not play with the border just yet. Let's give it some time. Let's see where the chips fall. Let's worry about if we can get out here. You could fish the, you could fish the perch on Simcoe. You could fish the Canadian side of Erie for walleye. Those should be at the river mouths or up the rivers at this point. If you really want to have some fun, go Grand River catfishing. That happens as soon as the ice is out as well. Go get some sucker strips and go catch those. So lots to do for us. Oh, and steelhead are at the mouths doing pretty well as well. Bay of Quinte, yes, Dwayne has no ice as well. Yeah, that's about it, guys. So hopefully we can do this again. Again, let me know via a message here. Yes, Crowley, perch. Let's do something. We can do current river, like Douglas asked, is current smallmouth. And I can bring a special guest on if you want me. I can get somebody who's really good at it as well. And then let's figure out what we want to talk about. I'll assemble all my gear. I'll give you guys as much information as I got on it. I mean, I'm not the authority on any one thing, but I have a pretty good idea on how to do a bunch of stuff. And if I can help a few of you out, maybe try Erie for the first time or get rid of that cabin fever and, yes, go grouting. Have you been fixing the bathroom, Todd? Trouting, yes, trouting. Todd asked me if we should go grouting, but then he realized he put that and put trouting. So yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, if you guys want to talk about map work, if you want to talk about, largemouth tactics, if you want to talk about spring walleye fishing in rivers, spring crappie, yes, great comment. Let's do largemouth. Yeah, absolutely, guys. We got a lot of time to do this. I'm suspecting we're going to be tied up until the middle of April, until our regular flu season starts to diminish. So until then, got nothing to do. Love talking to you guys. Appreciate all your time. Hopefully we'll see you next time. An hour 40. God, thanks. All right, guys. That's everything. Take it easy.